Welcome to our weekly 3-Minute Therapy podcast. And I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist and author of 3-Minute Therapy and other books. And everything we discussed is based on REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which says that our emotions don't come from situations themselves, but rather it comes from our thinking about those situations. And that's a very powerful concept. And further, our emotions, our disturbed emotions like anxiety, anger, depression, come from a particular type of thinking, and that's thinking in terms of demands. Must, should, supposed to's, have to's. I must do well and get approval. You must treat me well, and my life must go well. I'm here with my podcast partner, Mick Berry, an author of Stage Fright, with me. And we have a special guest, Niraj Nanal, who is familiar with REBT and has some questions about aging. Okay, Niraj,
Yeah,
did you want to start with your questions?
definitely. So, I want to ask this question in the context of REBT. And normally, these are my observations about people who age and they have certain emotional as well as practical problems, and how REBT can give a solution. So, shall I start with the questions?
Yeah, did you want to start with the first question?
Yeah. So the first question which I have is, when I talk about aging, normally it's a phase which, according to me, starts when a person retires, if he is in employment. And as he starts aging, the one notion catches him up that this is a flag end of his life, and this is going to be the worst possible time of his life. And then he creates anxiety about it, or maybe depression about it. So how to tackle that? This is my first question.
Okay, Mick, I'll bring you in on how to tackle that, but I'd like to say a few things about your premises, Niraj. One
Mhm.
is you're lumping everyone together who's aging. Now, research seems to indicate that many aging people are happier as they get older, rather than worrying about being old and things like that. Um,
Yeah. So I completely buy your point. So this is, as I told you in the beginning, this is my observation, what I have seen around people who are aging. So this is my observation. It is not
oh, I see. I see.
all. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that all the people who age are going through the same problem, but I see this as a predominant problem.
I see. I see. Well, thanks for that
Yeah,
clarification.
yeah,
Mick, did
yeah.
you want to say anything so far?
No.
Okay. Now, normally when people age and disturb themselves about it, they're thinking they're escalating their preferences into demands, such as because I prefer not to have aches and pains, therefore I absolutely must not. It's awful, terrible, horrible. I can't stand it. And so it's their thinking about that that's their main problem, not the aging itself. The aging itself is a practical problem, but then they create emotional problems about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
any other points that you mentioned, Niraj?
Yeah, so I agree with you on this, that it's never the situation, but predominant problem, a couple of other problems which I want to share with you, and that is the fear of death. Because as people start aging, they can see that death is approaching, or they are approaching towards a death. And many times people have a sense of disillusionment, that whatever life they have lived up till now, they may think that they have achieved nothing, or after achieving so many things, they still feel disillusioned. So in that context, the fear of death is many times I have seen in people who age or old people a fear of death. So how to tackle that? That's my
I
next
see.
question.
I see. Um, well, that's curious because I haven't come across that, but maybe we're dealing with different populations. As Mick and I say in our book, Stage Fright, the greatest fear people have, greater than the fear of death, is the fear of public speaking. But some people, I guess, have a fear of death. They don't want to die. And again, they don't want to die, and then they escalate it into a must. I must not die. I must live forever. This is terrible, horrible, and awful. And one of the things I point out to them, which is common to point out to people who have a fear of death, is that when you're dead, you're in the same state you were in before you were born. And when you think back at that, you probably don't think it was awful, terrible, or horrible before I was born. Mick?
As a quote by Mark Twain, I have no fear of death. I was dead for billions of years before I was born and suffered not the slightest inconvenience because of it.
Great. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I point that out to them, not as eloquently as Mark Twain, though. So death, at worst, means limitations, but there's some positives about death, and that is no more hassles, no more frustrations, no more pain, no more disappointments in your life. So everything in life, even death, has its advantages. Mick?
One more advantage to dying is no more fear of death.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
No more fear of death.
Yeah.
Any other aspects of that,
Yeah.
Niraj,
Yeah.
that you want to
Yeah.
raise?
So another aspect which I want to highlight is there is a term which is coined as ageism, which is it is basically a prejudice against old age people. Okay, so it consists of apathy, it consists of neglect, particularly from children. In Indian society, where the families are quite closely knit, old people are normally neglected by the young generation, and they have a sense of um, neglect or sense of insult which they feel. So this is another issue. This is another emotional problem which is faced by many old people, which is a neglect by the society or and particularly from family members.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like to some extent that comes from a sense of entitlement. Because I'm old and could use help, therefore other people should take care of me and make my life better. Well, that would be lovely. Again, it illustrates a human tendency of escalating preferences into demands. It would be lovely if people took care of you when you're older and you could use more help. But there's no reason why they have to. And if anyone's going to take care of you, you better rely on yourself and not on other people, and do the best you can.
Yeah, yeah. So there is normally the issue of a parent feels that a child has a responsibility towards him, and when his responsibility is not fulfilled as per his expectation, then he feels betrayed or he feels insulted or stuff like that. So I think you made your point there. He's escalating his preference into demands, but this is a common problem which I see around in our society.
Yeah, and again, the idea that the child has a responsibility to take care of their parents is something that the parents, older parents, have made up. They don't have a responsibility. The child and the parent didn't sign a contract saying that when the parent is older, the child will take care of them. If they did sign a contract, then that would be different, but usually they don't. So there's no responsibility there. And it sounds like it's another way that older people invent a way to upset themselves. Mick?
I actually disagree a little bit that I think culturally there is a bit of an understanding. There is no written contract and it doesn't have to be fulfilled. But generally, there is an understanding among many people that children will help their parents when they get older. And even outside of any expectation, it is a nice thing because the parents helped the child when the parents were when the child was helpless. And so in return, it is a nice gesture, and it's often done that children do help parents when the parents become helpless.
Yeah. Well, a cultural expectation, a culture is made up of people. And that means that people have this expectation, or some of them do, some don't, some are rational and don't expect that, although they might hope for it. So again, it comes down to the individual older person and whether they're going to take responsibility for their life or not. And if they don't take responsibility for their life, are they going to take responsibility for upsetting themselves about the lack of responsibility for their life that they assume other people should take?
Yeah.
Mick?
Yeah, I do think that there is an unspoken agreement. Now, it doesn't have to be adhered to by any means, but there is an unspoken agreement often between people, and it's their business. But somebody would get upset if they say this agreement must be adhered to. But it is a nice agreement that many people do have.
Yeah, I think we agree on that.
Yeah.
People have think that there is an unspoken agreement in the culture for this to occur, but again, it's up to them. They're individuals, and they can take responsibility for their emotions.
Customs can definitely be broken and not followed.
Yeah.
So in short, the way I understand it is it's about preferences. It is okay to have a preference. I prefer to be taken care by my children, but they don't have to.
Right. By the way, Albert Ellis had a view about this, and he is the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, what I spoke about earlier. And he would visit his elderly mother once a year and did not feel obligated to visit her any more than that.
What is a
So
rational?
I think he was a good role model. Yes, Niraj?
No. What is a rational? What he wants to signify from that action, that meeting once a year? What he wants to convey from that behavior?
That he chose how much responsibility he wanted to have in relation to his mother. And there was nothing that obligated him to do more. Mick?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I do think it's by far the most beneficial when somebody does something for somebody else, whatever it is, whether it's a parent helping a child or somebody helping somebody else. They have no expectations whatsoever, and to do it simply because you see that it's a good thing to do and you want to make a contribution to this person's life or help out this child, but to not expect anything from it whatsoever other than the enjoyment of doing it. I think that's the most beneficial towards individuals.
Yes, exactly. And this can be extended to reciprocity, that often people think that if they do a favor for someone, then that person owes them a favor. But, and you could say, well, this is in the culture, or this is the way humans tend to be, and that's all true. But as you're saying, Mick, if you expect someone to reciprocate, then all that would lead to is upsetness on your part, maybe anger, resentment, and alienation from this other person who didn't reciprocate, which will just make your life worse. So it would be good to get rid of any of those expectations, not hopes and desires and preferences, but expectations. Mick?
Yeah, I think that also applies to love. If you love somebody and don't expect anything in return, you just love them, that's the preferable state to be in. Whereas expecting love to come back to you is not fully loving somebody, it's not being generous, it's really thinking about yourself rather than them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so what we're expressing, a more rational way to look at uh, these aspects of human interaction, is not easy to accomplish because we all have these expectations, or many of us do. And it takes practice and work to change your thinking and think more rationally about these things. So we're not tossing these things off in a way that once you hear what we say, you're going to do fine in these areas. But it does take work to change your thinking and get over expectations and demands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Another point I want to highlight, another issue is that when normally people age, they are out of their occupation or their employment.
Mhm.
And that is the time when many of them feel listless because they don't have any absorbing interest. And that listlessness may result into, or they may result into some of these emotional and practical problems. So what is a prescription which they can work on, or they can use to make sure that they are not bored or listless, which normally they become because of their end of employment, or because of they are out of their profession?
It would be the same approach that I recommend to younger people who are bored and listless. And that is, as far as the practical problem goes, uh, find something that you enjoy doing and do it. Create what Albert Ellis calls in A Guide to Rational Living a vital absorption, something you enjoy, and pursue it. And Dr. Ellis humorously said, if you like war, work for war. If you like peace, work for peace, but work at your interests and create goals and
Yeah.
those things to work toward.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good point to be implemented.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, Mick wants to say
I was
something.
just
Please.
going to say I'm a musician for a living, and one band I'm playing in is a man who used to be a doctor, and he's now quite a good piano player. Now he's played piano his whole life, so he's lucky. You can't just pick up piano and become a really good piano player, but this is what he's doing in his retirement. And personally, I'm glad he's retired because he's got the time to put together all the details of finding the gigs for the band and the organization of the songs and all of this stuff. I don't want to do. I want to play and enjoy myself. And I'm too busy to do all the stuff that he has time for. But that's what he's doing in his retirement.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example of how to avoid boredom and listlessness when you retire, if you retire. Personally, I love doing therapy, and I plan to retire 6 months after I die. That's
And I have no plans for retirement at all. I am pursuing the things I want to do, and retirement is not in the cards.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
sounds like we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Raj, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and another maybe this will come under the practical problem, and that is related to finance. So being a certified financial planner, I many times see clients who are old, and most of their fortune is either utilized or they have used it for their children, and they have actually in reality some financial issues, and they make themselves disturbed about that. But financial worry is going to be a worldwide problem, for because as people will start living more, there is going to be an issue of financial provision for their old age and health and medical expenses and all that. And that is one of the predominant problem which I see. So any comments on that?
Again, this is a practical problem. Is that right? Is that correct, Niraj?
Yeah. But they have an emotional problem about this practical problem also.
Yeah. So the reason people have emotional problems about practical problems is because they start with desires or passions, and then they escalate them into demands, musts and shoulds, and that doesn't help. It only makes them feel worse, and it makes it harder to work on the practical problem and think clearly about that. So I suggest to those people who have these emotional problems to look for the must, look for the should, and show themselves again and again and again and again. There's nothing that has to be just because you want them to be, and there's no reason why things should change because you would like them to change. So the first step is to question, challenge, and contradict your demands, and then work on the practical problem.
Yeah. So, Michael, to sum it up from my side, can you give? I just highlighted some of the common issues faced by old people or people who age. Can you give a 5-step recipe or kind of a prescription which they can use to make their lives better in terms of their emotional health and also about their practical issues?
Well, as I've been saying, it's a 2-step process, not 5-step, and that is look for the irrational beliefs that are in your head that lead to your emotional problems. Because if the beliefs were reality-based, you wouldn't have emotional problems, just practical problems. So look for the irrational beliefs and get rid of them through A, questioning them and contradicting them, and B, working against them, showing yourself, for example, you can enjoy your life by finding vital absorptions, and you can do other things to make your life better. So it would be a 2-step prescription. Mick, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay, well,
And the
Niraj?
last point, just I want to chime in, and this is Albert Ellis. Did Albert Ellis wrote something about this? Did he have a book? I recollect he having a book on aging.
Yeah, I think he had
Do
a
you?
book with Emmett Velton on
Okay.
aging,
Okay.
and it was called Optimal Aging.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you again, Niraj, for being our guest. You brought in a lot of good questions about this issue. And thanks, Mick, my trusty partner here at REBT. And thanks, Chris Rossini, our trusty tech engineer, who makes all of this happen on the technical side. And again, I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, author of 3-Minute Therapy. And feel free to contact me if you are interested in psychotherapy. Comment below if you have any thoughts about aging or anything we said about aging. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Suggest subjects for us to address. Volunteer. Niraj survived, it looks like. So you would too if you were a volunteer and discussed a problem or discuss someone else's problem. Donate to Patreon to help support us. Subscribe to the 3-Minute Therapy podcast to stay on the rational side of life.